Hello, folks. My name's Ethan, and I've got a story for you today. So let's dive right in, all right? Picture this. I'm sitting in my car by the lake, enjoying a quiet night, when a voice comes from just outside my window. "Excuse me, sir. May I ask what you're doing here?" said the man standing to my left. I glanced over and I gave a bit of a smirk. "Sure, you can ask," I replied, playing it cool. He didn't seem amused. "Actually," he said, "I want to know what you're doing." By then, I'd already noticed he was a city cop, decked out in uniform, and while I wasn't exactly sober, I was aware enough to recognize that fact. Truth be told, I was feeling a pretty decent buzz. And honestly, I was in that kind of mood where I didn't much care about what anyone thought, not even this guy asking questions. "I'm just sitting here watching the moonlight on the lake, sipping a little single-barrel whiskey," I replied. "It's peaceful, you know? Now, I don't like to come off as highfalutin, but I've got a taste for this particular whiskey. It's not cheap, but hey, I treat myself now and then. And I'll be darned if it isn't better than the blended stuff. Besides, there's something about the moonlight that calms a man down." The officer leaned closer. "Sir, are you drunk?" he asked. I chuckled. "Almost," I said. "Give me a little more time, and I'll be well on my way. Tonight, I'm aiming to knock out a few million brain cells, particularly the ones telling me I love that. Well, let's call her a difficult woman I'm married to. I'm hoping a few more sips might make that a little easier to forget." The officer paused, then added, "All right, we'll get to that later. Do you know it's against the law to operate a vehicle while intoxicated?" "Sure do," I replied, "but I'd like to point out that I'm not driving. I'm just sitting here having a drink, and besides, this car is equipped with a system that won't let me drive if I'm over the limit." I pointed to the straw connected to the ignition. "I've got to blow into this thing and punch in a code. If my blood alcohol level's too high, the car won't budge. So, no worries on that front." He glanced around and noted the car's interior lights were on, as was the radio. "Yeah, that all works," I told him. "I like to see what I'm pouring, and a little background music doesn't hurt. Plus, if the battery runs low, the engine kicks on automatically just to recharge it. But it's not going anywhere. Can't shift into gear if I wanted to." "All right then, care to explain why you're out here in a city park, drinking alone?" he asked. I looked him over. "Well, officer," I said, "I needed a spot to clear my head. Home just isn't the right place for that right now." I wondered if he'd pick up on my change in tone. "No need to call me sir," he said. "Officer is fine, or just Eric." He asked for my driver's license, and I handed it over, figuring he'd already run my plates and knew the car was mine. It almost made me laugh. The new age, polite style of police work, offering their first names to put people at ease. "Well, officer," I said with a grin. "I figured sir is quicker than Officer Eric." He studied me and then cracked a smile. "You're not that drunk, are you?" he asked, picking up on my sarcasm. "Oh, I'm every bit as drunk as I seem," I said, "just not so far gone I can't keep it together." Right on cue, his partner stepped up, returning my license. They didn't look ready to leave, but they hadn't asked me to get out either. Instead, they stood there looking slightly uncomfortable. Their sergeant arrived and chatted with them for a bit, probably confirming my identity, because soon enough, the first officer circled the car and slid into the passenger seat beside me. "How about we have a little talk, Mr. Miller?" he asked. I laughed and told him Mr. Miller was my father's name. "You can call me Ethan," I said. He nodded and asked if there was anyone he should call on my behalf. "Not unless you're saying I can't keep drinking here," I replied, "and then you're welcome to call my lawyer." He chuckled. "Drinking's allowed in the park until 2 a.m., he said. "Then I'll stick around until then, or until I'm ready to leave. I'll either call an Uber or have my daughter pick me up. Need to talk to her anyway." I paused. "But, officer, what made you decide to join me?" He leaned back. "I got permission to sit here," he said. "My sergeant told me to stay and chat with you, though he didn't say much more. Said I could even have a drink with you if it felt right, but I'm going to pass on that." He glanced over my way. "Got any soda or water?" I smiled. "Single-barrel whiskey deserves to be sipped straight, but I might have a soda in the cooler behind you," I said. "I keep some on hand for those moments I want a little caffeine kick." He reached back and opened the small fridge. "What kind of car is this?" "It may look like just any other hybrid," I said, glancing back at Eric, "but this car's got more high-tech features than most people realize." He looked at me, still trying to figure me out. So, who are you? He asked. I sidestepped his question and changed the subject. Are you married? He shook his head. Well, I won't be for much longer. Ever thought about the whole idea of marriage? What it's supposed to mean? Fidelity versus infidelity. He hesitated but nodded. Yeah, I've thought about it. I'd expect a wife to stay loyal, and I wouldn't mess around on her either. Had a girlfriend once who didn't seem to feel the same way. Thought since we weren't married, she could still have her fun with other guys. That ended pretty quick once I caught her red-handed. I looked over, curious. What did you do? He smirked, a little embarrassed. Almost got myself booted off the force, to be honest. Walking on her with some guy right there in our place. Pulled my service weapon and made sure he understood exactly how close he was to a real bad day. He chuckled. He got the message, left town, but not before trying to file a complaint. My higher-ups had a quiet word with him. Let him know life would be a bit tricky if he pursued it. Still, I got a letter of reprimand, but that was a gift considering the situation. I let out a laugh and held up my fist for a bump. That's one way to handle it, I said. I'll admit, I'd have loved to catch my wife's friend in the act. I might have been a bit more, well, impulsive. Eric looked at me thoughtfully. All right, so I'm guessing your wife is cheating, and you know who it is? I nodded, impressed by his perception. Didn't catch them in the act, though. Instead, I get home one day, and she gives me that dreaded line. We need to talk. Didn't even bother with a honey or anything. Felt about as respected as a bad punchline at a comedy show. He winced. Ouch! What happened? Well, I said, taking a slow sip of my whiskey. She tells me she's found someone who gets her, someone more exciting. Her sister, Martha, is sitting there too, smirking at me. I ask her what on earth she's talking about, and she says she's found a real man who puts her first, makes her feel like a real woman. Meanwhile, Martha is sitting there, nodding like one of those bobblehead dogs from the old days. Eric shook his head. Wow. Oh, it gets worse. Her sister jumps in, says the guy's got plenty of cash and can support her the way she deserves. Tells me I should just go along with it, let Laura have her fun, and not give them any trouble. Then she throws in that he's man enough to take care of both of them. Yes, both of them, like it's some kind of badge of honor. Hurt isn't even the word for it. Eric's face showed the same shock I'd felt. Man, that's rough. I mean, really rough. You know, it wasn't even the fact she was cheating that got me first, I said. It was how casually she told me I wasn't enough for her, that I couldn't make her feel like a woman, couldn't support her the way she deserves. Now, she's never complained about our love life before, and I know I treat her well. The financial bit, though? That's just plain unfair. I work hard. I mean, look at this car. I didn't trick it out to keep myself from a DUI. I did it to help her brother, who struggled with drinking. Eric looked at me more intrigued. Really? Yeah, I said, taking a deep breath. My brother-in-law had a habit of drinking too much. This car's set up so he'd have to blow into the breathalyzer and enter a pin before he could drive home. It was my way of protecting him. But then one night, he couldn't get the car to start, and instead of waiting it out, he took a ride from another drunk buddy. They didn't make it home. Both died that night. After that, I took the car back. Eric nodded, absorbing it all. So, let's get back to your wife, he said patiently. Call me James, I said, smiling a bit. Feels weird to hear Mr. Miller. All right, James, he said with a nod. So, what happened next with your wife? I gave him a grin. You recording all this? Or are you actually trying to help me? I still don't get why you're here talking to me like this. You got a psychology degree or something? Is this some kind of new age intervention that got going now? Eric chuckled. Not quite. Actually, I have a degree in engineering. Did ROTC, served 4 years in the Army, and when I got out, the police force was hiring. Been here 2 years now. Engineering, huh? Well, maybe later I'll show you some of the setup on this car. You might appreciate it. But back to the story. I took another sip of my drink. So there they are, Laura and her sister, with their little suitcases packed, smirking like they'd won the lottery. Laura tells me she'll be home Sunday to discuss things. Like I'd be waiting around for that talk. Truth is, I'd rather disappear than sit through whatever speech she's planning. Eric looked at me with understanding. Sounds like she really blindsided you. She sure did. The worst part is I need to call my daughter. She's just graduated college, and she doesn't know any of this yet. I'm worried. She's at that age where the whole world feels a little fragile, and I hate to add to that. She's just starting out, you know, I said, feeling the weight of it. Living on her own for the first time, trying to get a career going, maybe even a social life. How do I tell her that her mother's cheating? I paused, letting that sink in. Or worse, what if she already knows and didn't tell me? And even worse than that, what if she knows and approves? That'd break me. I couldn't take that kind of betrayal. My hands were shaking, and for a second I almost lost it. Hey man, Eric cut in, using a firm but gentle tone. I mean, James, I'm Mr. Miller here. He gave me a half smile to break the tension. Let's take this one step at a time. You haven't spoken to your daughter about this, right? I nodded and then shook my head, almost too flustered to answer properly. No, I haven't, I said finally, feeling the sting of it. Tell me about her, Eric said, giving me a moment to regroup. Taking a breath, I leaned back. She's my pride and joy. Came along just a year after Laura and I got married. We were still in college back then. Laura didn't want any more kids after that. Said one was enough, no matter what I wanted. But my daughter's mine, through and through, even got the family resemblance. Thankfully, she took after the women on my side and not me appearance-wise. I saw Eric smirk, which helped me relax a bit. She's as sharp as they come, I continued. Decided to study computers, though she had the knack for engineering. Didn't quite follow in my footsteps, but she's got her head on straight. Eric looked thoughtful. Maybe you should call her, he suggested. Might be a good time. I hesitated, shaking my head. He shrugged, but I could tell he wasn't about to let it go. Later, maybe, I said reluctantly. I don't want to leave my car here, and I'll need a ride home when I'm ready to go. I'm just not there yet. Part of why I'm here tonight is to figure all that out. Well, if you keep hitting that whiskey, you might not remember any of those plans, Eric said, raising an eyebrow. I chuckled. Oh, don't worry about that. I've got a voice-activated recorder going, taking notes. Should have mentioned that sooner. Everything's recorded. I glanced at him. Assumed you had your body cam on. Anyway, I figure anything I say here's on record. Eric nodded. Yeah, fair point. He paused, then looked at me seriously. So, do you know who she's seeing? I nodded. Right then, his radio crackled to life, and he stepped away for a moment to respond. When he came back, he looked at me with a more curious expression. Mr. Miller, he started. What's your position with Essink Robotics? I shrugged. I'm an engineer, I replied. Eric gave a knowing smile. Not just any engineer. You're a senior engineer, right? I nodded, feeling a bit of pride creeping in. My captain just got off the line. Said you developed some of the prosthetics that helped his daughter walk again. Apparently, you're the one responsible for the prototype that restored her leg function. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't expect he'd share that with you, I said, shrugging again. Charlie's a good friend, though. I'm glad I could help. I knew his daughter from when she was young. After her accident, he was willing to let me test out the prototype to see if it could help her. Charlie sounds like a good friend, Eric replied. And he clearly has an interest in making sure you're all right. He hesitated, and I could tell he was holding back something. Please, sir, Mr. Miller, don't mess this up for me. He looked a little embarrassed, which made me realize Charlie must have pulled a few strings to have him keep an eye on me tonight. I grinned at him. I get it. Charlie and I go way back. Knew each other since junior high. He probably flagged my name, so he'd be notified if anything came up. I chuckled. Not exactly legal, but I appreciate him looking out for me. Eric looked thoughtful, then said, Well, Mr. Miller, James, how about I give you a ride home? You can sleep this off and face tomorrow with a fresh head. I shook my head, adamant. Not ready to go just yet. He sighed, still patient. All right, then how about a hotel? You sleep it off there and start the day tomorrow with a clear perspective. Seriously? I scoffed. You think I'm going to wake up tomorrow with a new outlook? No, he said calmly. Just a clear head. You don't have to make decisions clouded by all that whiskey. Look, I'm not ready to go anywhere yet, I replied, taking another sip. I like the whiskey right where it is. Eric shrugged, then tried a different approach. So, tell me about the prosthetics you've been working on, he asked, steering the conversation back to my work. I glanced over, seeing his genuine interest. Prosthetics is just one area we're focused on. We're also working on self-driving features, voice-operated robotics for people with limited mobility, helping them gain some independence in daily life. We've got motorized wheelchairs, robotic arms to help with eating or picking things up, and more. We even developed a prototype for, well, let's call it personal care. Had a little incident, though. One of our testers yelled "slap my rear" a bit too enthusiastically. Let's just say the response was a little too intense. Eric burst out laughing, his guard down for a second. He shook his head, obviously amused. Sounds like you've got some great ideas there. Tell me, why didn't you hire me? He asked, half joking. I applied to Essink Robotics, but I got the usual "we'll keep your resume on file" response. Probably ended up in the recycling bin, I said, nodding. But that's a shame. You've got the right background for the job. Send your resume directly to me, and when I get my personal life sorted out, I'll see what I can do. He thanked me, but quickly refocused on the matter at hand. He was doing his best to stay on task. So, how did you figure out who your wife's been seeing? I sighed. I followed her and her sister to the Marriott. I said, a bitterness creeping into my voice. Nobody pays attention to a little hybrid like this, I said, almost laughing at the irony. So there I was, watching from my car as they met the guy in the hotel lobby. That was all it took. He greeted them, all smiles, then wrapped his arms around both my soon-to-be ex-wife and her sister and kissed them like it was some grand reunion. Eric shot me a skeptical look, as if to say, you must have known the guy. Yeah, I know the scumbag, I confirmed. Smarmy little jerk. I just wonder if he's out to make a fool of me on purpose, or if he's just playing a game. Either way, he's certainly not the wealthy, high-rolling type Laura's convinced herself he is. Eric glanced over, curious. You do well for yourself, don't you, James? He asked. I mean, you're a senior engineer after all. That's a good living, right? So what's her angle about money? You're wondering if Laura's just a restless witch chasing excitement, or if she's a money-hungry witch looking to trade up? I said, chuckling bitterly. Probably a bit of both. And it's not like things have slowed down in that department. I'm 45, not too old to keep up. At least I thought things were going well there. Seemed like she was satisfied with what we had going. Eric nodded, letting me go on. My guess is it's more than that. Her sister Martha, she's a bad influence, a compulsive type. She'll hit a little jackpot gambling, and before you know it, she's lost it all, hitting the ATM again for more. Ends up broke and usually wasted. Martha has a decent job, and her kids are out of the house now, but she still can't keep her head above water financially. My wife's always bailing her out, and believe me, it's been a source of tension. Eric shook his head. That's got to be frustrating. So your wife's using your income to support her sister? Absolutely. And it's not just the money. After her husband died, Martha started seeing different men, too. I stayed out of it, but I can't ignore the financial part. It's like my wife's under her sister's spell, convinced I don't bring in enough. Between the two of us, Laura and I both have decent salaries. She's a school administrator, and we've done fine. We have a nice home. I cover my daughter's college so she wouldn't have to take loans, and we travel a couple of times a year. But Laura wants more. Fancier cars, more jewelry, a bigger house. And she's got her eye on the bank accounts like they're hers alone. Eric frowned. So she thinks you should demand a raise? I nodded. Yeah, she's been pushing me to go ask for more. But here's the thing. My brother's my boss. Eric looked taken aback. Wait, your brother? Yeah. Frank's the CEO and general manager. He's my older brother, and we draw the same salary. Laura knows that too, but she still thinks we're selling ourselves short. I hesitated, then continued. Frank and I started this company together. Actually, we built it up using trust fund money, and we've kept our incomes comfortable but modest. Frank's got an MBA and runs the business side. I handle the engineering. The trust protects the company's assets, but our personal ones are subject to community property laws. So that's been on my mind all night. So your wife thinks you're too soft to ask for a bigger paycheck? Eric asked. I shrugged. She doesn't say it outright, but I know that's how she sees it. She probably thinks I'm a pushover. I gave a short laugh. Maybe she's right in her eyes, but I'm happy with our lifestyle. We'd be in great shape if she didn't keep sending our money to her sister. Eric was quiet, then asked, So, have you made any decisions? Yeah, I replied, my tone resolute. I'm done accepting this kind of disrespect. After 24 years, I'm filing for divorce. That's one thing I know for sure. Eric nodded. I understand. You're worried about how your daughter might take it, but I think you need to talk to her. You may be afraid of her reaction, but it's better to face it together. I nodded slowly, knowing he was right. I nodded, a bit reluctantly, as Eric suggested driving me home. When I cringed, he tried to lighten the moment. Look, your wife isn't there right now, but I get why you'd be hesitant. I imagine you don't want to be seen as the rejected husband waiting around for her return. I raised my middle finger at him, and he just shrugged with a knowing smile, pleased he'd gotten a reaction. If it were me, he continued, I'd be packing up her things and establishing my own space. But fair warning, if she's anything like some other cases I've seen, she'll probably just walk right back in. I'd at least grab my personal stuff, change any combinations on safes, and secure important papers. Just don't go driving around tonight. I sighed. I've been thinking about it. The only problem is I might get too angry and start smashing things, or worse, burn the place down. The house is paid for, and if I don't file insurance, technically that wouldn't be a crime, right? Eric shook his head, looking serious. Trust me, staying in a hotel tonight is a lot cheaper than lashing out and letting that anger take over. You might avoid jail for arson, but your wife could still sue you for damages. She owns half of it all. Not worth the risk. He paused, frowning slightly. Even when I caught my girlfriend cheating, I couldn't legally kick her out. Since it was her residence, she had the right to stay. I looked at him, curious. So, how'd you handle that? Oh, I left the apartment to her, he said with a smirk. But that didn't mean I left anything else. Took all my stuff, furniture, kitchenware, everything I owned. When I finished, all that was left were her clothes, toiletries, and her computer stacked neatly on the floor. My buddies helped, and they saw everything was left clean and untouched. I had to laugh at that. Thinking about my situation, though, was bittersweet. My marriage was done. There was no way I'd let Laura keep treating me like that. When Eric suggested, yet again, that I call my daughter, I finally agreed. But first, he drove me to a drugstore so I could grab a toothbrush, then dropped me at a hotel. Anywhere but the Marriott. Once I was checked in, I called my daughter. Eric called one of his colleagues to pick him up, and before he left, we exchanged numbers. Daddy, why are you in a hotel? My daughter, Lily, asked the second she answered. Did something happen with you and Mom? I sighed. Honey, I'd rather talk about it in person if you're free. Of course, I'm free, she exclaimed. I was out to dinner with some friends, but you know I'm always available for you. I'll be there as soon as I can. After we hung up, I realized I'd forgotten to ask her not to call her mother first, but decided I didn't care if she did. As soon as she arrived and I opened the door, Lily frowned at me, noticing I was half inebriated. Dad, if you're drinking, then Mom must have done something pretty serious, she said almost to herself. I could tell she didn't kick you out. You'd have dug in your heels. So, let me guess, she left you, didn't she? I was taken aback. How'd you figure that? I drove by the house, but didn't stop, she explained. Aunt Martha's car was in the driveway, parked right in front of your side of the garage. I couldn't see if Mom's car was there, but it didn't look good. I sighed, nodding. Yeah, you got it? They're off with that guy, and I don't think they're coming back tonight. She stepped closer, looking for my reaction. When I confirmed it with a nod, she muttered, unbelievable, and then hugged me tightly as tears sprang to her eyes. I'm so sorry, Daddy. I couldn't hold it back any longer and began to cry too. All my anger, all my hurt, suddenly it all poured out. Knowing my little girl was on my side, I felt that connection even stronger. I love her, but I can't put up with this. 24 years just like that down the drain, I said bitterly. She pulled back and shook her head. Not down the drain, Dad, just a new beginning. And you're not alone. You've got me. I hugged her again, relieved she wasn't telling me to forgive and forget. Finally, I had to ask, did you have any idea this was coming? Any signs? Lily looked hesitant, then answered. Well, I suspected something was up. Mom and Aunt Martha have been spending a lot of time together lately. I mean, surely you noticed. I nodded, remembering. Yeah, she even stayed at Martha's place a few times. Seemed like harmless family stuff back then. Well, Dad, Martha has been out partying a lot, bars, dancing, you know, the whole thing. And by partying, I mean she's definitely been dating around, if you get my drift. Mom even commented on it once, saying some guy Martha was with had a cute backside. Lily rolled her eyes. Mom would say something like, "Oh, if only I weren't married," then laugh it off. And yeah, she did complain a few times about you not making enough money. Lily blushed a bit before going on. Look, I don't like saying this, but she said more than once, if your dad would just grow a backbone, he'd go demand the pay he deserves. He can't even stand up to his own brother. I shrugged. We have plenty to live well if she didn't throw money at Martha. Oh, I know, she agreed. I saw her wasting it. Meanwhile, you gave me a solid allowance when I was in college, but you made sure I learned to budget within that. If I overspent, it was on me. But that's how you raised me. She paused, heading to the minibar. I can't drink this whiskey straight, she said with a little grin. Got anything to mix it with? Do you want to pay for the overpriced minibar, or should I just run down the hall to the soda machine? Lily asked, eyeing the whiskey bottle. Either way, I need a drink to get through this. I chuckled, appreciating her practicality even in a rough moment. Don't worry about it. This isn't just any whiskey. It's top-shelf, single-barrel stuff. Cost me over $50 a bottle, so we're going to enjoy it. Besides, half of it's coming out of your mom's share when we settle things. Lily paused, surprised. So, this isn't something you're willing to forgive, huh? This goes way beyond a little fight over money, she said, piecing it together. I nodded and gave her the full rundown, from the moment I'd come home to the hotel encounter and everything I'd seen her mother and Martha doing in the Marriott lobby. Wait, so the cop just sat with you in the car and then actually drove you here? She asked, impressed. I nodded, smiling a bit. He's a good guy, smart too. Gave me some solid advice, like maybe not going home tonight and burning the place down or throwing all your mom's stuff out on the lawn for the neighbors to see. But I'm not keeping this quiet. She made her choice. I'm making mine. I'm not about to hide what she did. For all I care, she can wear that decision like a badge if she wants everyone to know she's available. Sounds like you've really thought all this out, Lily said with a bit of amusement. While you were sitting in the car drinking? I nodded. I might be hurt, but I'm not a fool. This wasn't some impulsive fling. She and your aunt have been cooking this up for a while, and tonight just confirmed it. I'm just glad you're not part of it. Lily's expression softened as her eyes filled with tears. Dad, how could you think I'd ever be in on something like this? I shook my head quickly. I didn't really. Just had a lot of thoughts tonight, all over the place. I was sitting there, wondering who knew what, and trying to piece it all together. Lily took a steadying breath, her voice firm. Well, I can tell you this. She might be my mom, but that's not going to stop me from telling her what I think. This is just beyond words. She sighed. So, what's your plan? I explained Eric's approach, telling her how he'd handled things when he caught his girlfriend cheating. He's not an expert, but he handled it directly, kept his cool. I hope to keep that same control, but there's no going back. This wasn't some slip-up or mistake. It was a choice to tear everything apart. Good, Lily said. She really messed up, Dad. She might try to twist it, say it was just to get your attention or something, but she's the one who went too far. She definitely did, I replied. You know, I always try to be fair with you, even though I could be firm. Lily grinned. Yeah, I remember. When you got mad, your lip would quiver just a bit, and you'd pull your shoulders back. That's when I knew it was game over. We laughed a little, and then she gave me a mischievous look. Guess this isn't the best time to bring up me asking Uncle Frank for a job at Essink? I raised an eyebrow, surprised but also pleased. You got offers elsewhere, I said. I didn't want to sway you just to work with us, but you know you'd always be welcome. Yeah, but those offers are all out of state. I can't leave now. You'll need me here, she said, her voice reassuring. That brought a real smile to my face. I felt better just knowing she was here for me. We'll work something out, I said, feeling a sense of hope I hadn't felt all night. Lily and I talked for hours, and after a few drinks, she was in no state to drive. I sent down for a toothbrush from the front desk, and she ended up sleeping in the other queen bed. I could hear her get up a couple of times in the night, probably restless like I was. Eventually, I woke to the sound of the shower running, and when she stepped out, her hair was still damp, and she was already dressed. I've got to go home to change, then I'm heading over to the house, she said, already in planning mode. You take a shower, check out, and meet me there. We've got work to do. No breakfast first, boss? I asked, grinning. She gave me a stern look with a smirk. Just get showered and back to the house. Then we'll talk about breakfast. It felt like a small step toward taking my life back. Honestly, I didn't want to go home alone. Figured if I did, I might just toss some of Laura's stuff into the front yard as a public statement and let her move it all back herself. So, I took my time. About 2 hours later, I pulled up to find Lily's car already in the driveway, and a pickup truck I didn't recognize parked on the street. When I walked inside, I found Lily sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee with Eric, the officer from last night. You mentioned how helpful Eric, Officer Thompson, was, Lily explained, so I jotted down his number and gave him a call this morning. I turned to Eric. You're sure this won't get you in any trouble? He shrugged. I'm off duty, and this is my day off. Besides, I think my captain would support it. And if not, well, he added with a grin, I might be due for a career change anyway. I went to change into fresh clothes, then asked Eric, by the way, can I get that car blocking my garage towed? He grinned. It's your house. Call the tow company. So I did. Whoever parked there would now have to pay for the tow, plus $40 a day in storage fees. Meanwhile, Lily had arranged for a storage unit nearby, a nice, climate-controlled one. By early afternoon, most of my clothes and personal items I didn't want to leave behind were safely locked away. I even packed up some bedding, towels, the guest room bed, my recliner, and the big screen. I took all the everyday dishes but left Laura her fine china. I also cleaned out the liquor cabinet. Petty, maybe, but I wasn't about to leave her with any of it. Once we finished, Lily looked at me. Dad, there are a few things I handled for you this morning that I need you to authorize, she said. Like moving half your money. I transferred it into my savings account temporarily. Did it all online by logging in as you. I raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Go on. I also called your investment broker to let him know you're heading into a messy divorce, she continued. Asked if he could lock your account. He said it happens all the time, so it's now frozen. To unlock it, both you and Mom have to be present or there has to be a court order. Is that okay? I nodded again. She grinned. Good, because that's what I did. I also canceled all your credit cards. Reported them stolen, but not before I paid them off from your bank account. I used the book of pins and passwords you left on your desk. All right, smart one, I said with a smirk, but what am I supposed to do for cash? Lily smiled. I left enough for an ATM withdrawal, about $400. Plus, remember that emergency credit card you gave me while I was in school? You're still a joint account holder, so it's yours to use too. Eric chuckled, impressed. You're thorough, Lily. But is this personal? She gave him a look that could burn through metal. No, Officer Thompson. My mom betrayed my dad, so I'm making sure she doesn't take advantage of him. I'd do the same for her if the roles were reversed. But I know my mom and Martha. They'll push him if they think they can get away with it. Right then, my phone rang. It was Laura. Why the hell isn't my credit card working, she demanded. They said it was reported stolen. You're just mad because I found a real man, and your fragile ego can't handle it. Well, I'm at the ATM right now, and I'm getting every last penny I can before you shut me out completely. I sighed, already knowing she could only withdraw about $2,000. Lily had transferred the rest. Laura would have enough to get by for a couple of weeks if she didn't blow it all in one night. I imagine she'd probably end up paying for everyone's good time tonight. You made your decision, Laura. Now I've made mine, I said flatly. I'm separating our lives as much as I can before I see a lawyer on Monday. We're done. I hung up before she could respond. Lily and Eric had both overheard the conversation. I looked up. All right, I'm starving. Let's go grab something to eat. I knew I didn't want to stay at a hotel the whole weekend, but an apartment search could wait. I called my brother, Frank, to see if he could put me up for a couple of days. What the heck did you do? He asked, only half joking. I didn't do anything, Frank. So you're saying Laura just went completely brain dead and either left you or threw you out? I paused. It's worse than that. Frank didn't push for details. Guest room's made up, so bring yourself over. Need a ride? Were you good? I'm good, I said, chuckling. And don't worry, I've got every last bottle of that single-barrel whiskey. Laura won't be pouring any of it out. Frank laughed. Good man, but don't waste it on the drive here. I want you sober enough to explain everything before you get sheet-faced. I laughed too, and told him I'd see him in a few hours after Lily and I had lunch. And that's it for today's story, folks. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and like, Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. As Lily and I grabbed a bite, I couldn't shake the strange relief I felt. The past 24 hours had been rough, no doubt, but seeing my daughter on my side, handling things with such clear-headed determination, gave me a bit of comfort I hadn't expected. Lily even joked that Laura should have left her out of it if she wanted an easy exit. Dad, you realize she'll probably try to flip the story to everyone we know, right? Lily asked between bites. I nodded. That wouldn't surprise me. She's probably going to tell everyone I've been too wrapped up in work, not paying attention to her, or whatever else she thinks sounds sympathetic. I took a breath, knowing it was the truth. But I'll be fine with people knowing it all. Let her play the victim card. We know what really happened. Lily nodded in agreement, her face serious. Well, let's not let her walk away with more than her share either. I'll make sure her friends know she's moved on to this well-heeled guy she thinks is her new meal ticket. I smirked. I don't need the world to know her business. It's enough that I know I'm not taking her back. Whatever she does from here, I'll stay clear of. I could tell Lily wanted to help me dig through what I'd just been through, but I knew that road wouldn't lead to anything good. As much as I wanted to stay angry, something about just sitting there with Lily, planning out my next steps without Laura, felt like a good enough start. After lunch, we headed to Frank's place, where he greeted us with his usual good humor. So, you've moved into my guest room, huh? He joked, slapping me on the back. Single-barrel whiskey and all? Something like that? I replied, cracking a smile. Maybe I'll need it as we hash out this mess. As the evening wound down, I finally let the tension release, sharing some laughs with Frank and Lily. The shock of everything Laura had done was still fresh, but the sense of betrayal was slowly morphing into something more manageable. It was only day one, but it felt like the start of a chapter where I wasn't waiting for someone to change who they were. Finally, Frank turned to me and said, Look, don't let her twist you up with guilt. You've got a good daughter here, and I'd say you've done right by her. If you need help through this, don't hesitate. I nodded, feeling grateful. Lily gave me a hug, and for the first time, the future didn't seem as grim. And that's where I'll leave it for now, folks. This story doesn't wrap up neatly, but life rarely does. I'm grateful to have my daughter by my side, and I'm learning that's worth more than any perfect marriage. Thanks for sticking around to the end.